Hey guys, and welcome to today's video where we are going to be talking about the makeup brand Glossier, their development, their success, and all of their scandals to date. This video is part of a series that I've been doing for multiple years, looking into everything wrong with certain makeup brands. So if you do enjoy this video, there will be a playlist in the description with all the other videos in this style. But before we start, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on, and don't forget to leave a like on this video if you do go on to enjoy it. So Glossier was originally founded by Emily Weiss, who did not start her career out in the beauty industry. So Emily was originally a fashion girly. She interned at Ralph Lauren twice and had a brief modelling career during high school, and then interned at Teen Vogue during college, which actually landed her a cameo in 3 episodes of The Hills in 2007, where she was known as the super intern. And she graduated college with a degree in studio art in 2007 and went on to become a fashion assistant at Vogue, having captured the attention of Eva Chen, who was at that time one of the editors in the beauty and health section of the magazine, who said that from the beginning Emily Weiss had this kind of special X factor. Seemingly Emily always had a very good work ethic. Hustle culture bros wished they were her, because during college she was balancing a full-time course, a part-time job, and a magazine internship. So when she got her full-time role at Vogue and suddenly had a lot of spare time on her hands, that's when she came up with the idea for Into the Gloss. So Into the Gloss was Emily's idea for a website that would show the general public the beauty routines of celebrities and those working in the fashion industry, having learned about the beauty routines of insiders whilst doing shoots for Vogue. And it was kind of like Vogue's Get Ready With Me videos that they do now, in a mixed media form, with some posts being in video format and some being kind of blogs. And not everything was written by celebrities, some was written by Emily, some was written by kind of stylists or editors or whatever, just various people who were working in the beauty and fashion industry that Emily had connections with, who she thought had interesting things to say. And the first post on Into the Gloss went live in September 2010, which was of publicist Nikki Deem sharing her Fashion Week survival essentials. And the most popular part of the site was the top shelf column, which shared the intimate details of various famous people's beauty routines, whilst the rest of the site also housed more general beauty and fashion related articles. And by early 2012, the site was seeing over 200,000 unique visitors every month, and former Elle employee Nick Axelrod was recruited to be the site's editorial director. And Emily Weiss was mostly working on the site between 4 AM and 8 AM because that was the only time that she had available outside of her commitment to Vogue. So having a few more hands on deck definitely helped propel the site, and by May 2016 they were getting 1.3 million unique visitors per month, which was 6 times as many as in 2012. And Into the Gloss provided Emily Weiss with not only intimate access to powerful people who were willing to share parts of their lives on her site, but also invaluable market research into her readers who were using that site to communicate with other beauty lovers about what they wanted to see from the industry. And this insight also allowed Emily to realize something much earlier than other brands, which was that millennial and Gen Z consumers wanted a more conversational, less formal approach from their favorite brands. They preferred advertising that felt more personal over the traditional top-down approach of in-store ads or celebrity endorsements. And in short, Emily Weiss recognized the power of direct-to-consumer products before a lot of brands did, and hence Glossier was born. So the original idea for Glossier was conceptualized in 2012, but it was not an easy ride to begin with. Emily approached quite a few investors, none of whom were interested in the project, but eventually on her 12th try managed to raise $2 million in funding in 2013. And the information on this is contradictory. An interview with Emily states the funding was raised in 2013, but Wikipedia and a different article claim that she didn't even start approaching other investors until 2014. But since the article that says 2013 was a recount of an interview with the CEO, I'm going to take that one to be the correct information. And Glossier was teased on Instagram in 125 separate posts before the brand was finally revealed and launched in October 2014. And this, if anything, just shows how much social media has changed, because if I had to sit through 9 months of teaser posts, I would unfollow that account real quick. But back then it got people excited, and that excitement was upkept right up until the launch. And the brand launched with 4 initial products: a moisturizer, a facial spray, a sheer foundation, and a lip and skin salve called balm.com, all of which were sold directly to consumers through the Glossier.com website. And Emily has talked about her vision at this time being about democratizing beauty by using social media and communities built through Into the Gloss to find out what consumers wanted and make products according to their feedback, with the brand reportedly regularly inviting customers to the Glossier offices to talk through their opinions on the product and the industry in exchange for free wine and pizza, which that would definitely get me there. Glossier's approach to product development was something the beauty industry had never really seen before, that being that it was personal. Every consumer had the opportunity to really build a personal relationship with the brand and get involved with the development of their product, whereas with other brands you wouldn't know anything about the products that are in development until they hit the store shelves and adverts. And this direct feedback loop and close relationship with their customers and community allowed Glossier to build a kind of cult-like following amongst those who knew the brand. They weren't by any means a big brand, and they definitely flew under the radar of a lot of people who weren't invested in the blossoming internet beauty community at that point. But for those who did know them, it was very easy to become invested in this brand because the products were relatively affordable, ranging from $12 to $35. And by 2016, there were 60,000 people signed up to a restock notification list without the brand having to really spend anything on paid marketing. And Glossier stayed in its kind of online e-commerce bubble for 2 years before the first physical store was opened in Soho, New York in November 2016, which was soon seeing 50,000 visitors walk through their door each month. The brand was perceived as fresh and exciting, not just because of their direct consumer relationship, but also because their products were quite different to what the rest of the market were offering. Glossier was putting out things that were sheer, they were subtle, they were premised on enhancing natural beauty rather than covering or hiding anything. And makeup brands weren't really doing this at this point. I think probably because a lot of their advertising was premised on showing beautiful people using their products as a way to say to the customer, look how beautiful you could be if you bought from us, rather than empowering the customer to feel beautiful anyways, but more beautiful with a few subtle touch-ups using their products. And also 2016 was obviously the era of full glam. Brands like Anastasia Beverly Hills were kind of top dog. People wanted maximum coverage, people wanted dramatic eye looks, big eyebrows. So this brand doing this like sheer, subtle stuff was kind of going against the grain of what everyone else was doing. And Glossier's in-store experience was supposed to play on this. As people queued to get in, employees who are not known as employees, they are called offline editors, would walk down the line and they would hand out sunscreen and face mist to ease the wait. And the interior of the store was designed to be kind of very pink, very minimalistic, for maximum Instagram engagement. You know, there was photo opportunities, all the employees were dressed in these really nice pink jumpsuits. Everything was there to make you take photos of it. And they also had another strand to their appeal during this time, which was that they kind of seemed to be inclusive and diverse. I think this was mostly because a lot of their promotion on social media came from real customer photos, which a lot of brands weren't doing. They were kind of using the paid campaigns. So when you went to Glossier's Instagram, it looked like they had a much wider range of people who were using their products than the traditional brands. And I do think that Glossier's ability to do this was aided by the type of product that they made and they still make now, which are very sheer. So they don't necessarily need a huge shade range to cover a lot of people. Like for example, the Fenty Beauty foundation, if I picked up a shade that was just slightly wrong, you would be able to tell, whereas if I picked up a tinted moisturizer that was just a little bit off, you probably wouldn't be able to tell. However, their skin tint only had 3 shades to start with, which that's not going to cover the entire population. So they definitely were not a diverse or inclusive brand by trade. This was simply a byproduct of their social media marketing strategy rather than part of their brand vision. And to me, I've always thought of Glossier as being for the clear skin girlies. Like, it's not going to give you coverage, it's not going to hide any imperfections, it's simply going to even out your already perfect skin tone and give it a nice glow. Like, Glossier has always had a focus on aesthetics. Emily has said that when she was writing about beauty brands and thinking about creating her own brand and the success of different brands, the question that she would always ask herself is, would I buy a sweatshirt from this brand? Rather than anything to do with the products themselves. And this focus on branding and aesthetics not only informed Glossier's overall brand, but also the products themselves. And a lot of the time when you think about things being aesthetic, they're clean, they're sharp, they're minimalistic, and that's what Glossier's products have always been intended to deliver. The no makeup that makes it look like you're just naturally flawless, rather than the bold, colourful looks and the full glam that a lot of brands in the 2010s were starting to experiment with. And it was an interesting choice from Glossier to go in the direction of minimalist makeup when the consumer at that time was looking for full coverage, full glam. But building that solid foundation, no pun intended, in 2014 to 2017 allowed them to really work on their strategy, products and branding with only a relatively small community of loyal followers in the grand scheme of things, looking at what they were doing, so that when clean beauty became a trend a few years later, Glossier had already established itself as a competitive brand on the market for that aesthetic and had a lineup of strong products for consumers to choose from. However, we are going to come back to this because I think in theory, Glossier should have blown up as a result of clean beauty, but they didn't, and I'm gonna explain why in a bit. So Emily Weiss seemingly always had this very strong vision for what she wanted Glossier to be, from the overall look of the brand down to how the brand would interact with individual consumers in every single sales channel. And I think this perfectly demonstrates why she was always labeled as a girl boss. So in the 2010s, there was a surge of women founding their own startup companies, which would often go on to become unicorns, which means a company that has over $1 billion valuation. And Emily Weiss was one of these founders. Having a kind of girl boss at the helm was an important part of Glossier's branding to begin with, because they were relying on readers of Into the Gloss who knew and loved Emily to transition into being Glossier customers. However, as time has gone on, the concept of a girl boss has kind of become a bit of a running joke on the internet. I think particularly because MLM companies caught onto it and they started describing all their kind of salespeople who were losing money on products every month as girl bosses or boss babes. And the term therefore lost the empowering meaning that it was supposed to have because these companies overused it so much. And with this decline in kind of overall respect for anyone termed a girl boss, a little bit of Glossier's sparkle dulled because people were not really interested in Emily or in awe of her girl bossing as they were before, especially as she'd kind of branded herself as a feminist icon rather than being conferred that title by her fans. So when the girl bosses fell, Emily kind of fell with them. And at this point, Glossier did start to detach itself from Emily in the kind of 2017 to 19 era, not in terms of she stepped back from the company, but in terms of she stopped being mentioned in conversations around Glossier as they tried to ensure that the brand could stand on its own 2 feet rather than needing that feminist angle and that face of the brand to sell. A lot of the marketing at this point had been geared towards millennial consumers because as a millennial herself, Emily really wanted to capture what that generation were looking for in the branding, and also because, you know, she started Into the Gloss in 2010, which Gen Z were like 8, so they were not reading beauty blogs, so the whole idea of Glossier stemmed from a very millennial concept. It was aimed at millennials, it was made by a millennial, and the branding has always reflected that, you know, it's in the millennial pink. But the downfall of the girl boss coincided with Gen Z and people like me who are in that murky water between millennial and Gen Z getting to an age where they wanted to get into makeup. So Glossier needed to make a few changes to appeal to us, with the loss of the girl boss aspect being one of them. And instead they supposedly went for a kind of approachable vibe. You know, they wanted people to see Glossier as the girl next door, but I never really got that from them. I think because their product only worked for people who have very clear skin or people who were happy to have little to no coverage in their foundation, I always felt like Glossier gave off a more like it girl, cool girl vibe, you know, that kind of vibe of you want to be me but you can't, because I've never felt like my skin would be good enough to make those products look as good as a foundation with medium or high coverage would. So I've always shied away from Glossier for that reason, because I felt like, you know, unless you are flawless, Glossier is not going to work for you. It did, however, work for anyone who was trying to kind of ease their way into makeup gently. You know, they didn't want to go straight for full glam. It was for everyday wear. It wasn't like hiding everything. So for anyone who wanted to experiment a little bit more, those were the right kind of products to experiment with without the risk of looking cakey or having a face that is a completely different skin tone to your neck. However, even when it got to a point where Glossier was very popular for being the antithesis to full glam, the company decided that they wanted to expand, and so they briefly launched a sub-brand called Glossier Play. And this sub-brand was odd, to say the least, because it was the complete opposite of everything that Glossier was built on and stood for. So the products included in the Play line were colourful, they were glittery, they were basically products for a special occasion or for bold makeup looks only, which is a stark contrast to the minimalism and the sheer coverage offered by the main brand. It was a strange move from Glossier because they would have known that their typical consumer was not using bold, colourful, high coverage products, and therefore not many of them would be interested in this new line. I can understand that they wanted to diversify their product offering to appeal to a wider range of people, but their entire brand was built on aesthetic, and this line just did not fit with the clean, dusty pink image that Glossier had drawn around itself. And I guess they got to a place where the main brand was doing so consistently well that they wanted to also try and cash in on current makeup trends at the same time. But seemingly it didn't go as well as they expected, because the Glossier Play line was discontinued in January 2021, less than 2 years after it was launched. And Emily said in an interview that essentially, in hindsight, the launch wasn't as well thought out as it could have been, and the line was unnecessary because they could have just brought out more product in their main line. However, Glossier as a brand had generally struggled in 2020, so it's not a surprise that they culled their kind of less profitable sub-brand at the end of the year. But let's talk a little bit about what actually happened in 2020. So obviously, like with every other retailer, Glossier had to close all of its brick and mortar stores during the pandemic, but customers were still able to buy products through the Glossier.com website. However, when the stores closed, Glossier found themselves in hot water because an Instagram page called Outta was created, where staff who worked in the stores would tell the world about their experiences working for the brand, which were mostly negative and included toxic management and racism from both managers and customers. So a couple of examples of this, there were managers who were constantly getting the names of BIPOC employees wrong, a group of customers who would regularly come into the store, use the wrong foundation shade to paint themselves much darker than they actually were, and then walk around the store in blackface, which the managers allowed this group to continue to come in and do that on a regular basis. And the employees continued to post their experiences on this account throughout 2020. So it started in August and the last post was in December. And they wrote an open letter to the brand asking for a call with the senior leadership team where they could discuss all of the problems that they'd faced as part of working for Glossier. And they wanted that call to be compensated, and they wanted the Glossier main brand page to post about what was discussed on the call. And their demands generally were pretty reasonable. They wanted things like anti-racism training every quarter for management, transparency about wages, a zero tolerance policy for discrimination, etc. A lot of things that a lot of companies already have in place. So they were not making out-of-pocket demands, they were not making unreasonable demands, especially in light of the experiences that people were detailing on that Instagram page. Glossier really should have looked at that and said, yes, we need to do something different, and then listen to the employees in terms of how they thought it would be best dealt with. And they also, as the year went on and they didn't make any progress in achieving their demands, encouraged customers to boycott the brand and hosted a few successful boycotts. And as the page gained rapid popularity, people's opinions of Glossier started to quickly decline, especially as Glossier didn't really provide any substantial or useful responses to this. However, Outta the Gloss went silent at the end of December 2020 without any explanation. Their last post was celebrating their most recent successful boycott and promising that it was not going to be their last, but there hasn't been any activity on their page since then. So without an update, it's hard to say why they stopped posting. If they reached an agreement with the brand, I would have expected them to post something about it, and I would have assumed that Glossier would ask them to post something about it to give them some good press in light of all the bad press that page had given them. But it's possible that an agreement was reached behind the scenes that included a clause stating that Outta the Gloss needed to become dormant immediately. However, they could have also been threatened with legal action. Obviously, these were individual employees posting these stories. They do not have the kind of money or legal power that a brand like Glossier has. So it's possible that they were threatened to be sued and decided that they weren't going to risk it. But essentially, it's all very murky. We don't really know what went on behind the scenes and where negotiations between the brand and its employees ended up getting to. And public perception of Glossier was not great as a result of the activity on Out the Gloss plus the closure of their stores, although they did manage to claw some of that back during 2021 and 2022, particularly as the trend of clean beauty started to arise, which is obviously the aesthetic that Glossier has always prided itself on. And Glossier never really made any substantial changes as a result of the accusations from Outta the Gloss, with Emily Weiss's blog post on the subject labelled as performative, and as far as we know, none of the employees' demands were ever met, but somehow by ignoring the problem, Glossier managed to make at least some of it go away. And clean beauty really started to blow up in 2021 as a result of TikTok, and Glossier was right on the money with the type of products that fed into that aesthetic. And after all, you know, this entire brand had been built on sheer formulas and minimalistic makeup for the past like 5 years. Had this trend come around in 2018, Glossier would have been absolutely the top dog. However, by 2021, there were a number of other brands that were also doing what Glossier was doing, but they were doing it better. So, for example, Rare Beauty, Selena Gomez's beauty brand, which is always focused on a more minimal makeup look because Selena herself always focuses on more minimal makeup, launched with 48 foundation shades compared to Glossier's 12. And people started to see that actually Glossier was very stagnant. Glossier was sticking to what they had always done rather than branching out in light of these other brands coming up and competing with them. I think Glossier had almost this chip on their shoulder of, we've been doing this for the longest and therefore we are the best, rather than thinking about, okay, so there's more brands in the market doing what we do, how are we going to make ourselves stand out and compete with them? And as I said earlier, their products have always been for the clear skin girlies, and they've never made any attempt to open the brand up to a wider audience by adding a few higher coverage products. So people began to grow tired of Glossier because it felt like they didn't really care about catering to a lot of people. Instead, they were kind of happy in their like it girl bubble. And they didn't ever really expand on their existing products. Think, for example, Fenty Beauty. So their foundation, when they first launched, was a huge success. But since then, they have taken that full coverage foundation and they've made a medium version, they've made a skin tint version with the same shade range, whereas Glossier has only ever had one foundation range with one type of coverage, and they've never expanded outside of that. So their brand just kind of started to feel stale in comparison to others who were catering to that clean beauty aesthetic. And even though clean beauty was trendy, Glossier were not making that look accessible for enough people. So for most who were trying to achieve that aesthetic, they were going to look to buy products elsewhere. And Glossier also doesn't actually fit with the clean beauty aesthetic because they do not have clean formulas or sustainable or refillable packaging in the way that other brands who play on the clean aesthetic do. So for example, one of the big problems with the Glossier Play line was that the glitters were non-biodegradable and the packaging was foil, which was not recyclable. So people were looking at this and going, okay, so you've just in 2019 made an entire range of products that are not friendly to the environment at a time when consumers are starting to become increasingly more bothered about how environmentally friendly their products are. And you know, they've always shipped in plastic packaging. They have the kind of pink envelopes that everything comes in, and the only thing that they've done to combat that is give customers the option to not have the plastic packaging when they order from the website, which, you know, if you don't look and untick that box, you're going to get the plastic packaging. Whereas other beauty suppliers, for example Beauty Bay, they ship everything in a cardboard box now because that can be recycled, whereas the plastic that Glossier ships in can't. Essentially, Glossier rode on the coattails of what they built back in 2014 and hoped that people would just flock to them now it was trendy, but the market has massively expanded since then, so amongst all the other options, Glossier just did not stand out. And one move that I will commend them for, which I think was smart, was that they signed Olivia Rodrigo to be a brand ambassador who, you know, she's one of the pioneers of that clean beauty trend because obviously she's young, she's very fresh faced, and she always wears minimal makeup because she is young. But apart from that, their marketing really remained the same as it always had been. You know, having Olivia on board was great to appeal to that younger audience, but if that younger audience don't have perfect skin already, they aren't going to buy Glossier. And this is a problem that I think a lot of pioneer brands have, which is that when they are the first to do something, they set that trend, but then once other brands are doing it just as well as them, they lose their unique selling point and customers have no reason to buy from that brand except for consistency. You know, they've always bought from them. And people got bored of Glossier, and Glossier did nothing to combat that because they only knew how to do one thing and they weren't really bothered about learning how to do anything else. And this is not helped by the fact that Glossier has always been inaccessible to a very large chunk of people, not just because of the product, but because for most of its life, the only way to get Glossier was either through its website or in one of its own stores. But they've only ever had one store in London and a few stores in the US and no stores anywhere else. So there were not that many people who could get to a store, and their website only ships to a very select number of countries. And it's very strange, the list of countries that they chose. So for example, you could buy Glossier if you lived in France or Sweden, but not if you lived in Germany. And that almost added to this kind of high school mean girl image that it was almost as if the brand had decided that people who live in Germany are not cool enough for Glossier. So if you are in France or Sweden, you are cool enough for Glossier, but the rest of Europe just didn't make the cut. And it's also very strange because you think in a market where they are getting increasingly outdone by newer brands, they would want to give as many people as possible the opportunity to buy from them, because after all, they were the legacy clean beauty brand. But for some reason, they just never saw that as a priority. So for customers in countries that weren't picked to access Glossier, even places like Australia, like why are you not shipping to Australia? It's one of the most populated countries, and it makes no sense why they would not. But anyone who was in one of those countries, you know, they're gonna find another brand. You know, they're not gonna be interested in Glossier because they can get their clean beauty fix elsewhere now. And Glossier had also resisted going into any third-party retailers pretty much since the beginning of their brand, but direct-to-consumer brands really started feeling the squeeze. You know, obviously during the pandemic, it was good because people could only shop online, but even then, a lot of people were going to places like Sephora to look for multiple products at the same time, because with Sephora, you can pay one lot of shipping for like 5 different brands. But Glossier never went into any third-party retailers until February 2023 when they struck a deal with Sephora. However, with this decision to go into Sephora, Glossier have also decided to reformulate a lot of their products in order to meet this kind of clean beauty and vegan standard, which could be regulations set by Sephora, or it could just be that they've realized that they are playing catch up amongst all the other brands who are meeting those standards. However, there's been no announcement about this. People have only realised that the products are being reformulated when they have arrived at their house and they have not performed as well as they're used to. And a lot of discussion around this is happening on Reddit or in the comments of Glossier's Instagram posts, with the majority of the reformulations apparently performing worse than the previous product, and actually a lot more people reporting allergic reactions to the new formulas, which that's actually kind of dangerous to reformulate a product and not tell the customer, because if you change the ingredients in something and you add in an ingredient that could be an allergen, the person who has been buying that product for years, who is allergic to that ingredient, will not know that they are then going to be allergic to that product, and if they use it, they're going to have a reaction. The only reformulation that was actually formally announced was the one to balm.com, but people think that Glossier U and the Puff have also had changes without the brand actually telling the customers that. And also, Glossier started to send out the reformulated version of balm.com from Black Friday onwards, but they only made the formal announcement in February. So there were 3 months where customers were unknowingly receiving a different recipe to what they had gotten used to before. This decision to reformulate and to go into Sephora has likely come as a result of Glossier getting a new CEO in May 2022, when Emily Weiss formally stepped down from the position after 8 years in the driving seat. She is still very involved in the brand, but she is no longer in charge. And this change in directorship came only 4 months after 1/3 of the brand's employees were laid off in January 2022, mostly from the tech team. So seemingly Glossier over the last year have had a complete shake-up of their internal structure and their brand vision. And I do think this was needed after Glossier became stale. I honestly think the company probably just raised too much money in a short space of time, because they raised like $1.3 billion of funding in like 4 years. And that has meant that they've had to force extreme growth and compromise on some of the essentials like long-term visions and workplace culture in order to reach the targets that are set by their many investors. And during the late 2010s and the early 2020s, a lot of the original girl bosses were criticised for an aggressive leadership style that caused a toxic workplace within their companies. And whilst Emily was not name dropped in that, like for example Steph Curry, who founded Away, was, I do think that she fell into the trap of putting so much pressure on her company to grow and keep up her girl boss image that the brand ended up internally being a lot uglier than their aesthetic would have you believe, and became unsustainable once employees started speaking out and people stopped respecting the idea of a girl boss at the helm. And I do also think the obsession with image is what prevented the brand from growing how it could have, because Emily Weiss was very attached to her original vision of direct-to-consumer minimalist makeup. She never partnered with any third parties to increase their offering. She never really expanded the product ranges, and as such her brand fell into a state of stagnancy and plateauing in a very fast-moving industry. And Emily Weiss's successor is Kyle Leahy, who had sat quietly behind the scenes as Chief Commercial Officer at Glossier for many years, and who stated in an interview with Bloomberg that her vision was to expand the brand beyond Emily's vision into more retail channels in more places. So hopefully the inaccessibility problem will be dealt with sooner rather than later. I do think that Glossier could potentially come back if they worked on getting rid of the glass screen between them and the average consumer by offering more shades, more products, and offering them in more countries. I do also think they would probably benefit from an internal report detailing everything that they've done to combat the accusations of a toxic workplace and their issues with racism, as a way to reassure customers who boycotted them following that scandal that they have dealt with those issues and worked with employees to create a better workplace. However, I doubt that they will do this because they don't want to draw attention to something that caused people to stop buying from their brand, especially when their products are at $180 million annually, so they're not exactly struggling as a result of that. But that would kind of tie up the loose end from that scandal that never really got resolved. And really, I think Glossier's biggest challenge right now is just getting back to relevancy after being outdone by other brands offering the same type of products. You know, they would really need to diversify their product line to get people excited about the brand again, which, you know, it could happen. This new CEO seems to be making significant changes to the brand's direction, so I wouldn't be surprised to see that, but their focus right now seems to be on reformulating their current products, which seemingly is not boding well for them because the reformulations are performing worse. And if any new products were to follow this new worse formula, they likely wouldn't become hit products because people already don't like the new formulas. But whether they can get back on top remains to be seen. You know, we don't know what the long-term business plan for Glossier is, but all we can do is wait and see. So for now, that is all that I have to say about Glossier. If you did enjoy the video, then be sure to leave a like, leave a comment with any thoughts that you might have, and subscribe to see more videos like this. Like I said, I will leave a link to all of my other Everything Wrong Withs in a playlist in the description if you want to watch any of those. But apart from that, I will hopefully see you guys in my next one. Bye guys!